When you see a homeless person, your immediate impression is that the person is poor and doesn't have enough money to feed themselves, let alone put a roof over their heads. But what if we told you that's not always the case? We're about to break open a side of the panhandling world that you never thought possible. Here are 10 homeless people who are actually very rich. Did you know that you can make your video streaming experience richer? All you need to do is subscribe to The Richest by clicking on that red subscribe button. Also, make sure you click on that gray bell to turn on those notifications. Homeless by choice. Becoming homeless is the last thing on most of our lists. As the saying goes, we're all just a paycheck or two away from being on the streets. But what if you chose to be homeless, meaning you walked away from your life of financial stability and luxury and became a beggar? Seems like a ridiculous choice, right? Well, before you judge too much, that's exactly what 68-year-old Lou Denard did. He has a trust fund of over $700,000, which he got after his mother passed away and her assets were sold to create the trust. He withdraws about $2,500 per month, and he gets an extra $500 per month for Social Security. Denard has a career as a carpenter, but he left his job 30 years ago to live on the streets. Even though he's rich, he doesn't want to leave this life. He doesn't want to sleep inside, and he tells people that they can't make him. Denard's lawyer has tried to get him set up an apartment, but he always walked away with the key in the door. Technically, his lawyer could get him committed involuntarily, but it seems that Denard is generally happy living life on the streets and being homeless by choice. She's a survivor. Can you imagine going through some of the roughest patches in your life and not getting a break at all? What if you had a way to escape, but you made a sacrifice so you could benefit those around you? In 2009, a shocking story came out of New York City when Hebrew University announced they received a $100,000 gift from an unexpected benefactor. Who was it? A homeless Jewish woman who survived the Holocaust and lived on the streets of New York City. It's hard to imagine to not only survive one of the worst periods in world history, but then to live life on the streets. The unknown woman lived out the rest of her days from a shopping cart. She was also employed by a Jewish man to help move his car periodically so he wouldn't get ticketed in exchange for a hot meal and a place to stay. By the time the woman passed on at the age of 92, she had saved up over $300,000. While it is unclear how she got this small fortune, it seemed that she lived frugally so that it would benefit the Jewish people upon the execution of her will. Homeless billionaire. When you've stayed at a hotel, you probably fantasized for a moment that you could just live in that nice, fresh room. But if the blacklight test freaks you out, then maybe that's more of a nightmare than a reality. In the case of Nicholas Berggren, he's known as the homeless billionaire, and is perhaps the richest homeless person to have ever walked the earth. All of Berggren's possessions stayed in a paper bag, and he refused to own a car. The successful businessman literally has a knack of creating billions from Trump change. So why didn't he want to settle down and actually have a place to live? Apparently, his work was demanding a lot of travel from him to the point that he was in 14 cities a month. It was actually just easier for him to sell his New York apartment and call hotel chains his home. Ironically, he also isn't attached to material things, despite the fact that he could buy a small island for himself. He'll also buy artwork, like Andy Warhol originals, and then just donate them to museums, thus making him a rather generous homeless person. Berggren eventually settled down and bought a place to live, but his claim to fame will always be the homeless billionaire. Life in a bag. If you think that Berggren is a rare example, allow us to introduce to you Natalie Sisson. Her whole world fits into a suitcase. She has been homeless since she was 32 and has been traveling the world and works from her laptop. She is known as the suitcase entrepreneur. So this means she has no permanent address and calls herself a digital nomad. She has about 8 different sources of revenue and also does coaching through Skype. Sisson says that she saves about $2,000 a month because she doesn't have to pay rent, and she has to travel light for the sake of keeping everything in one suitcase. Of course, people thought she was insane since she left a well-paying job in London. You won't find Sisson panhandling on the streets though, even though she is technically homeless. Today she is earning 6 figures from her online entrepreneurship and teaching social media and marketing skills online. She has 17 SIM cards for her mobile phone, bank accounts in 4 different countries, passports from 2 different countries, and has a permanent residency set up in a 3rd. Sisson is planning on slowing down a bit since it's hard to maintain a love life when you're a nomad traveling the world. Surprise inheritance. Imagine that you're living on the streets with little to no money to your name. Then some random person comes up to you and says that you've inherited a hefty estate of $100,000. That's exactly what happened to Max Melitzer, who was living in Utah and was homeless. He became homeless in 1990 after his wife and 2 friends were lost in a car crash, and Melitzer was driving. His brother didn't want to see Melitzer homeless, so when he passed from pancreatic cancer, he left his brother $100,000. The brother was in New York and Melitzer was in Utah. It took the family over a year to locate him. Initially, he didn't show up to his court date to claim the money. Eventually, he made his way to New York and he apparently spent some of the money on cars and a night at a Red Roof Inn. After that, Melitzer faded away into obscurity except for random pop-ups in the local media about how he was doing. It is unknown as to whether Melitzer still has the money, but apparently a good deal was spent to help him live an independent life. You've made it halfway into the video. Let's celebrate with a quiz question. How many people are homeless in the United States? While you ponder that, let's take a peek at the last 5 homeless people who are actually very rich. Hefty estate. Like the anonymous Jewish woman we learned about earlier, sometimes there are rich people, even millionaires and billionaires, living on the streets. That guy who asked you to get a burger, he might have 7 figures to his name and you would never know it. After NPR got a hefty donation from the estate of Richard Leroy Walters, NPR's Robert Siegel decided to look into him. What came as a shock was that Walters was homeless. According to a Catholic mission in Phoenix, he passed away at the age of 76 at a senior center. Before he ended up at the senior center as a patient, he was living as a homeless person with his possessions in his backpack. He would sleep on the grounds at the center, get his meals from the hospital, and use the center's phone. Walters had a master's degree, served in the Marines, and even had a career as an engineer at a company called Allied Signal Corp. He was never married and didn't have children. Plus, he was estranged from his brother. When his life ended, he left behind a staggering $4 million estate. Money went to the mission, the senior center, a beneficiary, and NPR. Oil heir. We all dream about one day digging into the ground and striking oil. And with oil prices these days, that's an instant fortune. So imagine how shocked the world was when William Tavularias Jr., the son of oil tycoon and Mobil CEO William P. Tavularias, was discovered to be homeless. He was living out of his 1995 Range Rover and was getting in trouble with the law countless times from removing a parking booth, driving without a license, and even exposing himself. Tavularias, known as Tav, is sitting on a trust fund that is worth millions of dollars. Before he was on the street, he had a nice place to live in London and even had a yacht. After moving to Miami Beach and divorcing his ex-wife, it seems that Tav was dealing with psychological issues and he prefers the life of being homeless. Given that he could afford a house and never have to worry about paying a bill for the rest of his life, it's no surprise that his family is greatly concerned for his well-being. His family is hoping that if he gets in trouble with the law again, a judge will put Tav in a treatment program instead of placing him back on the streets. Tin Can Kurt. If you live in a town where you can get money for recycling cans and plastic bottles, then you know the struggle of collecting all that stuff and then lugging it to the recycle center. Basically, you need a lot in order to make even a buck at these places. With this in mind, may we introduce to you Kurt Fiegerman, better known as Tin Can Kurt. He lives his life on the streets and was homeless, but it wasn't until he passed that it was discovered that he made millions from recycling cans. Kurt pretty much used that money to play the stock market, and he ended up being a financial genius. But the citizens of the coastal Swedish town he lived in had no idea, not even his family. After Kurt passed on to the next life, his family was left behind to argue over who would get that hefty sum of money. It's kinda tacky to hear the story since Kurt was homeless, and it didn't seem his family was that interested in helping him when he was alive, but they still want his money. We'll leave the judgment up to you. Cavemen Brothers. Sometimes all it takes is a family member leaving behind a huge amount of money for your fortune to change. If you're a pair of brothers living in a cave because you're homeless, this could be quite a shock. Considering that Zolt and Geza Beladi were making cash from selling junk they found on the street, imagine their surprise when their grandmother left them over $5 billion. For a while, they were living homeless and didn't even realize the money they had. Their maternal grandmother passed away while she was living in Germany, and like Melitzer, lawyers were scrambling to locate the two brothers. Along with a sister living in the US, the brothers will literally never have to work another day in their life. No longer would they need to live in a cave. Even though the grandmother may or may not have known about the brothers' existence, per German law, direct descendants are automatically entitled to a share of the estate. Because the grandmother's daughter was also gone, the money went straight to the grandkids. The brothers had to prove their identity and genes, but that's fairly easy. When asked what they wanted to do with the money, the brothers dreamed of finally finding partners and going back to school. Forgotten money. Ever found any money in your jeans or coat? That's a pretty awesome feeling, isn't it? What if you discovered that you had an entire bank account in your name with tons of money in it? In 2015, John Helinski made the news when he realized he had a lost bank account. Wait, how does that work? Well, Helinski was living on the streets of Tampa, Florida for about 3 years and was sleeping on park benches or living in cardboard boxes, pretty much whatever he could find. Helinski was born in Poland, and police and social security workers were trying to find his information so he could be placed in a homeless shelter. While a birth certificate was trying to be located, a bank account under Helinski's name was discovered. The bank went through a name change, but it still existed, which meant that Helinski's money was still there. He actually forgot that he had opened the account. There was enough money for him to put down a deposit on a home. So if you're feeling inspired to start digging to see if you have a bank account floating around someplace, can we join you? Just kidding. Or are we? How many people are homeless in the United States? About 500,000. Hopefully their luck will change very soon. Well, thanks for watching. Tell us in the comments which story was the most shocking to you. While you're here, be sure to check out some of these other videos from our channel. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and hey, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.